I'm a little young, but you don't know what I've become. Can't you see it in my face? The demon living in disguise, but you can see the killer in my eyes. I've got a look you can't escape.
Charlie and the Chocolate Factory is a book written for children by the author Roald Dahl. It was published in 1964 about the adventures of a young boy by the name of Charlie Bucket, who wins a trip into the magical world of Willy Wonka, an eccentric chocolatier. The time is the 1930s. Mr. Dahl is attending school at the Repton School in Derbyshire, England, a private all-male school. Cadbury, a British multi-international confectionery company, would send samples to the school for the children to eat and give their reviews on these possible new products. During this time period, Cadbury and Rowntree were the two largest chocolate manufacturers and would often send spies into each other's factories to try and procure each other's recipes. All of these experiences gave Mr. Dahl the inspiration for his book, and of Slugworth being Wonka's arch rival. However, according to Mr. Dahl's autobiography titled Boy, it wasn't all chocolate sweets. He describes one of the many hazing practices that he was subjected to. As one of the younger students, he was instructed to warm toilet seats for the older boys. This was just one example that he gave, while going on to say that he could have filled up an entire book. While writing Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, Mr. Dahl faced many editing battles. One of these battles was described in this interview with the BBC by Mr. Dahl's widow.
It was his agent who thought it was a bad idea when the book was
to have a black hero.
To have a black hero, yeah. And she said, people would ask why. And
well, that's the next book, isn't it?
Yes.
A reworking.
I know. It would be wonderful, wouldn't it?
In the first edition, the Oompa Loompas were described as African pygmies and were depicted in this manner in the original printed edition. After the announcement of a film adaptation, the NAACP expressed concern that the transporting of the Oompa Loompas to Wonka's factory resembled slavery. Mr. Dahl, sympathizing with their concerns, rewrote and published a revised edition where the Oompa Loompas were drawn as being white and appearing similar to hippies. This continued on in the sequel book, Charlie and the Great Glass Elevator. Mr. Dahl's book has been made into 3 movies and, according to some, a sequel, but we'll get into that a little bit later on. There have also been board, video, and mobile games made in the world of Willy Wonka. In 1971, Mr. Dahl's book was adopted into an American musical fantasy film directed by Mel Stewart from a screenplay written by Mr. Dahl, based on his 1964 novel. The movie starred beloved actor Gene Wilder as the chocolatier Willy Wonka. Peter Ostrom, who made his debut, played the poor but optimistic Charlie Bucket. This was to be Peter's only acting role, as he then went on to become a veterinarian. The plot of the movie, we find an aging Willy Wonka with no heir who decides to mail out 5 golden tickets around the globe to trust fate to find the perfect child to come and learn his ways of making chocolate and to take over his factory and to look after his beloved Oompa Loompas. Each child is approached by Mr. Slugworth shortly after finding their golden ticket, and offers them an opportunity if they will give him the new candy that Mr. Wonka is developing. Through a comical set of events, every child, including Charlie, doesn't listen to the advice given by Mr. Wonka. The actions of their misdeeds is further reinforced by some very comical songs with life lessons presented to us by the Oompa Loompas. However, Charlie comes through in the end and returns the everlasting God-stopper back to Mr. Wonka. In doing so, Charlie wins the big prize promised by Mr. Wonka, his magical chocolate factory. The second adaptation of Charlie and the Chocolate Factory is a musical fantasy film released in 2005. It was directed by Tim Burton with the screenplay written by John August. The film starred Johnny Depp as Willy Wonka and Freddie Highmore as Charlie Bucket. This adaptation began development in 1991. However, this time the Dahl estate was giving total artistic control. Early on in the film's development, such great directors as Gary Ross, Rob Minkoff, Tom Shattuck, and even Martin Scorsese. Some of the actors considered early on to play Willy Wonka were Bill Murray, Nicolas Cage, Jim Carrey, Michael Keaton, Brad Pitt, Will Smith, and even Adam Sandler. However, when Tim Burton was selected, he immediately brought on his collaborators Johnny Depp and Danny Elfman. Mr. Burton decided to go with constructed sets and practical effects rather than computer-generated environments. Also, this rendition, Mr. Burton returned to the original text and used the squirrel room versus the golden goose room, going so far as to have specialty trained squirrels from birth just for that scene. In this movie, there is more of a backstory given on Mr. Wonka and his relationship with his father, with Charlie ultimately helping Wonka reconcile with his father. The most recent movie, titled simply Wonka, was released in November of 2023 and stars Timothe Chalamet, Keegan-Michael Key, Rowan Atkins, Jim Carter, and Hugh Grant, just to name a few. In this third film about the character Willy Wonka, it focuses on Wonka as a young man and his challenge in starting up his own chocolate factory and store while going up against the chocolate cartel. So now my final thoughts. While the original adaptation starring Gene Wilder will always be my favorite because it's near and dear to me, it was the Willy Wonka of my childhood, my youth. After rewatching the remake starring Johnny Depp, which I originally didn't like, I found it to be particularly weird, even creepy at times. Looking through a fresh set of eyes and after getting knowledge from doing research about this series and knowing that the Timothy Burton version is more in line with the original book, I look at it with a little bit different perspective. And it, I think, stands the test of time and on its own 2 feet. And lastly, after watching the third movie involving the Willy Wonka character, I'll say this. The movie is fine. The acting is fine. The musical score is good as well. However, it just didn't move me or cause me to feel that familiarity. Maybe it's because it's such a new film. I don't really know. I can't necessarily put my finger on why, when, or where. But it's still a good movie, and it is worth the viewing if you have access to it through a streaming service. Well, that concludes this video. Oh, that's right. I hinted at a fourth movie. Well, let me introduce some of you to a movie called The Snowpiercer and the theory that lies around it. The Snowpiercer is a post-apocalyptic science fiction movie based on a graphic novel entitled Le Transpersonnage, I'm sure I butchered that, by Jacques Laube. However, some believe that it is in fact a possible sequel in the Wonka universe. This clip from a video by creator Rhino Stew sums it up nicely.
I really liked Snowpiercer, but one interesting thing about it was that it reminded me of my favorite movie of all time. Okay, I may have lost a lot of you there. How could an incredibly violent R-rated movie set in the post-apocalypse from 2013 possibly remind me of a children's classic from the 1970s? Well, they're both two movies about groups of people that work their way through a large, fantastic structure. One by one, a person from the group is removed in each room until one person makes it to the very end, who then found out that the entire thing was a test because a wealthy industrialist needed to find a new successor. Okay, are you still with me? Because the more I've been thinking about it, the more I'm convinced that Snowpiercer is a sequel to Willy Wonka, and Ed Harris plays the adult version of Charlie Bucket, who took over Wonka's candy empire and who is the one who built the super train.
Thank you for staying to the end. If you liked the video, please consider liking and subscribing.
皆は僕をダメなやつと